So nowhere in the textbook do they talk about the nature of mankind. Nowhere in the curriculum do they mention the nature of mankind and its connection to globalization. But due to my background in philosophy and psychology, I like to connect things with the nature of mankind. And I truly believe that every A2 is about the nature of mankind. And within every A1 you can see some kind of commentary about the nature of mankind. If this, then what? If man is fill in the blank characteristic, good, evil, empathetic, exploitive, if man is this, then what? What does that mean about the role of government, the role of individual? That's the heart of essays in Social 30. If this, then what? If man is, irrational, then can we have capitalism? If man is exploitive, can we have capitalism? Well, this isn't Social 30, but there's so much overlap. If man is irrational, if man is exploitive, can we have economic liberalism? Can we have free trade? Can we have economic globalization? If man is exploitive, then what should be the role of the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO? Should it be to extend capitalism on a global scale? Or should it be to govern and try to regulate our nature to make sure that capitalism is a vehicle for good and not a vehicle for evil? So, having said this, we do have an essay that's looming, and I do apologize that everything fits into that essay, and that can be somewhat overwhelming. But definitely the nature of mankind will fit into it, and a part of your final synthetic thinking of this course will be that, we began by looking at, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And then we looked at the idea, is that a natural cornerstone? Is greed a natural cornerstone? Is self-interest a natural cornerstone? In a social Darwinistic way, what is natural? What is justifiable? Is might right? And now that we're into this global village in the post-Bretton Woods Conference contemporary globalized world, we're looking at these common problems we share. And can we provide a solution? And the theory is maybe the nature of mankind is going to get in our way. That there's a solution there to climate change. There's a solution to overpopulation. There's a solution to deforestation and desertification and ozone depletion and animal habitat destruction, but man's nature will get in our way of actually implementing the solution. That's one of the arguments we're exploring, is that our nature will get in our way of providing a solution to the problems we face. So how does that make sense? Well, if our nature is exploitive, if our nature is to put self-interest first, then will we see an end of sweatshops? Probably not. If we can profit from the misery of others, then as long as we can profit from the misery of others, we will see the misery of others. So if man is exploitive, then perhaps we will always have misery. We'll always have disparity. We'll always have the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. So definitely we can look at the nature of mankind and how it connects to the global village. If mankind is cooperative, if we are wired to cooperate, if we are social animals that like to work with others, then maybe we can find a cooperative solution to common issues, like COVID-19. COVID-19 is a global issue right now. So when there's a vaccine, is it going to be that the wealthy first world nations vaccinate first because they can afford it, because they're going to buy it up? They're going to buy it from Pfizer, they're going to buy it from Johnson & Johnson, they're going to buy it from those who create it, and therefore the United States will be okay, Canada will be okay, but then we'll have an outbreak in the third world, and they might not be able to afford the vaccine. So are we cooperative? Will we kind of put into play some of that Marxist ideas, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Is that the way we're wired? Will we provide vaccines to the countries in most need, to occupations and age groups that need it the most first? Obviously, that the numbers show that there's people that are more vulnerable than others based upon age. So are we going to inoculate, I think that's the right word, are we going to inoculate people over the age of 65 globally before 50-year-old Canadians get inoculated? Will senior citizens in Nigeria get the vaccine before Russ McBride does? If they don't, then that shows us something about the nature of mankind. Do we identify as, Canadian, or do we identify as global? Are we only concerned about our neighbors here, or are we concerned about our neighbors everywhere? That's part of global village. Within this global village, who do I have compassion and empathy for? We're even seeing that as Albertans. As Albertans, we might be looking at the nation that we live in, and we might be saying, you know what, we don't want Alberta's money to go to Quebec. We don't want Alberta's money to go to Atlantic Canada. So if we don't even feel that fraternal bond with Canadians, do we have a fraternal bond with everybody? So another part of this nature of mankind is where are our loyalties? And this is preloading some stuff from Social 20. In Social 20, it's about nationalism. It's about groups that you identify with. And that's a part of the global village. Is the global village very fragmented? All these competing nations? Or are we getting to a point where we are going to work together as one species? So when I look at the nature of mankind, I like to look at the tulip mania. Do you want to tell us about the tulip mania? I'm just curious, maybe your family has some connection with this story. You guys know what tulips are, right? Imagine selling your house to buy a bulb because you think tulips are gonna be a better investment, that you're speculating on the future value of tulips. Well, there was a stock market in the Netherlands in the 17th century where people became so fascinated with tulips that they sold their homes. They sold their homes in the fall so they could buy some bulbs, not many bulbs. It might have been like a 1-to-1 ratio. And then they're speculating that the value in the spring would be so much that they could buy a house back and much, much more. So they're thinking that the fascination, the love affair that people had with tulips would just keep growing exponentially. But what happened over the winter was, people decided maybe tulips aren't worth that much. The value plummeted, and many, many people lost their homes. So tulip mania, coming from the Netherlands, shows mankind's irrational. Tulip mania is one of many economic bubbles. We've seen an economic bubble in America in 1929. The bubble broke, and it caused the stock market crash. So if this, then what? If man is irrational, then what should we do in the global village? Do we need to regulate our activities? Do we need government? Do we need a government that governs not only microly but macroly? Do we need a one world government? Because if man's irrational, then who's to say the President of the United States isn't? Then maybe we need some authority above him or her to govern them. So let's look at a quick TED Talk on this, and then we'll continue.
How much would you pay for a bouquet of tulips? A few dollars? $100? How about $1 million? Probably not. Well, how much would you pay for this house? Or partial ownership of a website that sells pet supplies? At different points in time, tulips, real estate, and stock in pets.com have all sold for much more than they were worth. In each instance, the price rose and then abruptly plummeted. Economists call this a bubble. So what exactly is going on with a bubble? Well, Let's start with the tulips to get a better idea. The 17th century saw the Netherlands enter the Dutch Golden Age. By the 1630s, Amsterdam was an important port and commercial center. Dutch ships imported spices from Asia in huge quantities to earn profits in Europe. So Amsterdam was brimming with wealthy, skilled merchants and traders who displayed their prosperity by living in mansions surrounded by flower gardens. And there was one flower in particularly high demand, the tulip. The tulip was brought to Europe on trading vessels that sailed from the east. Because of this, it was considered an exotic flower that was also difficult to grow, since it could take years for a single tulip to bloom. During the 1630s, an outbreak of tulip-breaking virus made select flowers even more beautiful by lining petals with multicolored, flame-like streaks. A tulip like this was scarcer than a normal tulip, and as a result, prices for these flowers started to rise, and with them, the tulip's popularity. It wasn't long before the tulip became a nationwide sensation, and tulip mania was born. A mania occurs when there is an upward movement of price combined with a willingness to pay large sums of money for something valued much lower in intrinsic value. A recent example of this is the dot-com mania of the 1990s. Stocks in new, exciting websites were like the tulips of the 17th century. Everybody wanted some. The more people who wanted the tulip, the higher the price could go. At one point, a single tulip bulb sold for more than 10 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. In the stock market, the price of stock is based on the supply and demand of investors. Stock prices tend to rise when it seems like a company will earn more in the future. Investors might then buy more of the stock, raising the prices even further due to an increased demand. This can result in a feedback loop where investors get caught up in the hype and ultimately drive prices far above intrinsic value, creating a bubble. All that is needed for a mania to end and for a bubble to burst is the collective realization that the price of the stock, or a tulip, far exceeds its worth. That's what happened with both manias. Suddenly, the demand ended. Prices were pushed to staggering lows, and pop, the bubbles burst, and the market crashed. Today, scholars work long and hard trying to predict what causes a bubble and how to avoid them. Tulip mania is an effective illustration of the underlying principles at work in a bubble and can help us understand more recent examples, like the real estate bubble of the late 2000s. The economy will continue to go through phases of booms and busts. So while we wait for the next mania to start and the next bubble to burst, treat yourself to a bouquet of tulips and enjoy the fact that you didn't have to pay an arm and a leg for them.
So the same nature mankind that caused tulip mania, or the dot-com bubble of the 1990s, or the stock market crash in 1929, or the speculation on cryptocurrencies that we've seen in the last 10 years, the same nature mankind is the same reason why we had the transatlantic slave trade. Same reason why we have sweatshops today. Same reason why we have children being kidnapped and being held as slaves. Mankind's exploited, we're greedy, and we see opportunity in the misery of others. And as long as we do that, you could make the argument that the global village will not be safe for everyone and will not have bounty or wealth shared by everyone until there's some force that can govern everyone. So, little quick introduction into the nature of mankind and how it connects to our topic of globalization. Because if globalization is defined by the interconnectedness of man, a question we should be asking is, when we connect, what are our objectives? Why are we connecting? And sometimes when we're connecting, we have people that connect because they want to take advantage of others. And we saw that with King Leopold when they ended up taking advantage of the Congolese people. We see that with the legacy of Columbus. We see that with many of the European stories of first contact. So now we're going to look at the tragedy of the commons. And then we'll see that it hasn't always been this way. That there was a time when we lived more collectively. Instead of having individualism shape our lives, we were shaped by collectivism. So we could have a paradigm shift towards collectivism, and that would be a paradigm shift back to something that had already existed. So we could make the argument that individualism might be an experiment, that maybe our true nature is to be collective, to care about the common good, to care about the collective responsibility we have. And if caring about the common good is our true nature, then maybe together, globally, 8 billion people can solve some of these challenges we're going to be looking at. Sorry, I just got to pause it on that Aristotle quote, because I've said it a few times in the last week, but when Aristotle says it, it sure sounds a lot better, right? It resonates with a lot more authority and credibility. What is common to the greatest number gets the least amount of care. And again, I think that fits in with the how do we solve the problems? That there are some individualists that will say, we will only be able to solve the problems that are of the environment when the environment is privately owned. Reason why we are contaminating the biosphere? Because the biosphere is public space, and therefore it's owned by everyone and valued by no one. So that's what an individualist would say, is that the solution is more capitalism. The solution is more individualism, not less. So just an interesting thing to note. So not everybody agrees with Aristotle, right? And that's the whole point of social studies. We're trying to give you multiple opinions. Environmentalists, Al Gore would say, no, this is too divisive, too simple thinking. But here we go with the tragedy of the commons.
Imagine as a thought experiment that you live in a small village and depend on the local fish pond for food. You share the pond with 3 other villagers. The pond starts off with a dozen fish, and the fish reproduce. For every 2 fish, there will be 1 baby added each night. So, in order to maximize your supply of food, how many fish should you catch each day? Take a moment to think about it. Assume baby fish grow to full size immediately, and that the pond begins at full capacity, and ignore factors like the sex of the fish you catch. The answer? 1. And it's not just you. The best way to maximize every villager's food supply is for each fisherman to take just 1 fish each day. Here's how the math works. If each villager takes 1 fish, there will be 8 fish left overnight. Each pair of fish produces 1 baby, and the next day, the pond will be fully restocked with 12 fish. If anyone takes more than 1, the number of reproductive pairs drops, and the population won't be able to bounce back. Eventually, the fish in the lake will be gone, leaving all 4 villagers to starve. This fish pond is just one example of a classic problem called the tragedy of the commons. The phenomenon was first described in a pamphlet by economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833 in a discussion of the overgrazing of cattle on village common areas. More than 100 years later, ecologist Garrett Hardin revived the concept to describe what happens when many individuals all share a limited resource, like grazing land, fishing areas, living space, even clean air. Hardin argued that these situations pit short-term self-interest against the common good, and they end badly for everyone, resulting in overgrazing, overfishing, overpopulation, pollution, and other social and environmental problems. The key feature of a tragedy of the commons is that it provides an opportunity for an individual to benefit him or herself while spreading out any negative effects across the larger population. To see what that means, let's revisit our fish pond. Each individual fisherman is motivated to take as many fish as he can for himself. Meanwhile, any decline in fish reproduction is shared by the entire village. Anxious to avoid losing out to his neighbors, a fisherman will conclude that it's in his best interest to take an extra fish, or two, or three. Unfortunately, this is the same conclusion reached by the other fishermen, and that's the tragedy. Optimizing for the self in the short term isn't optimal for anyone in the long term. That's a simplified example, but the tragedy of the commons plays out in the more complex systems of real life, too.
So before we see the exciting conclusion of the tragedy of the commons, let's think about this. What would Adam Smith say is the solution? Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, you learned about capitalism last year in grade 9 social studies. He's referenced a little bit in chapter 9 this year. What would Milton Friedman, what would Adam Smith, what would Hayek, what would supporters of economic individualism say? Yes?
Someone to control the pond.
Yeah. So as long as the pond is owned by all of us, I'm going to overfish it because I'm expecting that you're going to overfish it and eventually there will be no fish. But if I own the pond just by my own, if it's McBride's pond, then it's in my best interest to not overfish it. If I'm the only one fishing in it, then I will never overfish it to the point of not having any fish left because that's not in my economic best interest. So if the pond is owned by everyone, then my assumption is that it's going to eventually have no fish in it because people will be greedy and overfish. But if I own the pond individually, then it will be sustainable. So Adam Smith would look at the tragedy of the commons and say, this is why we need to privatize everything. Because when you privatize everything, then people have a vested interest. They have skin in the game. They are a stakeholder. And they're a shareholder. They literally hold the share of that value. So they're not going to allow it to become worthless. So if Russ McBride owns the water by the lake park, I don't want it to be a dead pond. A dead pond is worth less to me than a pond that is thriving. So then I will be protecting it and I will be interacting with the species that live in it in a sustainable way. But if all of Wetaskiwin owns that pond together, then we may end up destroying all life within it. And I think we see this play out, that like Aristotle said, what is owned collectively, what is held in common, is really valued by no one.
The overuse of antibiotics has led to short-term gains in livestock production and in treating common illnesses. But it's also resulted in the evolution of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which threaten the entire population. A coal-fired power plant produces cheap electricity for its customers and profits for its owners. These local benefits are helpful in the short term, but pollution from mining and burning coal is spread across the entire atmosphere.
So in that scenario, the person who's mining and processing the coal, they make money by processing the coal, but they don't own the air, so they don't care. So the solution, to continue the logic of the tragedy of the commons, is that the same people who own the air need to own the factory. So that the value that they're creating in the factory may be actually damaging the value that they own in the air. And then if you're losing money, it's not an externality anymore. An externality is the unintended consequences to someone else. Now instead of an externality of your factory, you're basically destroying your own clean air that you own. Then you're going to do things in that factory differently. So somehow we need the people that own the factories to own the air. Now, you could do it through Marxism, or you could do it through capitalism. But the point is, we need to do it. Until the same people see the cost, the real cost of their economic activities, we'll still continue on with this irrational, destructive economic activities.
and sticks around for thousands of years. There are other examples too. Littering, water shortages, deforestation, traffic jams, even the purchase of bottled water. But human civilization has proven it's capable of doing something remarkable. We form social contracts, we make communal agreements, we elect governments, and we pass laws. All this to save our collective selves from our own individual impulses. It isn't easy, and we certainly don't get it right nearly all of the time. But humans, at our best, have shown that we can solve these problems, and we can continue to do so if we remember Martin's lesson. When the tragedy of the commons applies, what's good for all of us is good for each of us.
All right, so we'll wrap that up there. I'm going to return back to the lesson here. We can see the same idea of the nature of mankind impacting work. You can see it impacting business. So if mankind is predatorial by nature, then you end up getting places like Walmart that may exploit cheap labor. So we as consumers, we tend to see this sign at Walmart, we're rolling back prices. But what we don't see is that they're also paying exploitive wages to those who work there. So how are they able to pass, low prices on to the consumers? Walmart is notorious for not allowing unions. If a local wants to unionize, like one store in Quebec wanted to, they shut down the store. Walmart employees are not allowed to unionize because a union would push up the cost of labor. And they want to keep labor costs low so they can keep prices low so that Walmart has a niche. We also see this here with economic globalization, that money is flowing out of America, and this cartoonist is suggesting that illegal laborers are flowing into America. So this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense economically, for sure. We talked about outsourcing earlier in the year, and here we have New York City in the background, and we have some factories going to China, and we have a office building going to India. I'm going to stop the video now, and I'm going to get you to see if you can analyze this source. See if you can find a problem. See if you can find a solution that we can infer. See if you can connect it to language of the course. See how many words you can connect to, and obvious one's outsourcing, but there's more. See if you can connect it to the nature of mankind. See if you can connect it to a division of society. Who would support what's happening there? Are there individuals that would say, yeah, this is the right thing to do? Are there individuals that would say, man, this is not the right thing to do? How does it connect to globalization? Is what's happening showing globalization to be good or bad? So I'm going to give you a break from listening to me. I'm going to get you to work on interpreting this one source. Feel free to talk to the people around you while you do this. This is where, again, we used to have lots of time to get in a cluster up, talk about this source. I would do that every 20 minutes or so, but now it's not as easy to collaborate. But try to collaborate with others about this source, and we'll talk about it in about 10 minutes.